clowns. And people have come to this conclusion specifically because of strange hallucinatory events in which these certain kinds of spirits that are humanoid and are these strange clownish looking characters that kind of exist in an interdimensional kind of kaleidoscopy sort of realm. This is kind of getting into what I think we're talking about, right?
But
And
have you seen a Nephilim though? Like, could this not just be a way to make them grotesque?
Well, what we do know is that there is a real phenomenon with a spiritual creature that is fitting the description that we are calling Nephilim. That phenomenon it exists. I kind of want to believe that it's accurate. My buddy from who's a Canadian expat in Costa Rica, he wrote a book that I need to read it. I've read 3 of his other very important books on similar subjects. He wrote a book called The Devil in Us that he always talks about on his podcast, The Talamanca Review. His name is Bruce McDonald. He was a colleague at Revolution Radio who went through his own shamanic journeying and now lives in Costa Rica in a pretty chill life. And you can ask him about the duende all day long. He doesn't play with them much, but they're just part of the flora and fauna of the mountains that he lives in. He ended up having a devil creature informing him about many aspects of the book. And he called it Creeper, and it was a here and there and that's it. And Creeper showed up. He didn't do any magic. He didn't summon Creeper. Creeper showed up because he's following his inner inspirations for the book he wants to make. And within divine order, God allowed this clown spirit from the underworld to come and basically talk about them in their actual function here on this earth as kind of like custodians of evil, right? You know, they come around. It's just like, oh, you're evil. You know, you got free will. I'm going to follow you around and, you know, I'm going to eat you alive when you fuck up. And that's kind of like part and parcel of what these things are. And it reminds me of exactly what happened in the anime Death Note. Not that Bruce was writing names in a notebook to kill people. He was just writing a book about the devil as a man of God, but not of any faith, but of his own relationship developed by himself. You know, he had this clown, this creepy clown creature who was never mean to him, scared him, a threat or whatever. He was just there as the book informant. You can believe him or not. I believe him because I know some of the other shit that he's written. And I know where he was coming from with the other books he wrote. So that would be my recommendation to you. That phenomenon is real and of note, and it fits other things. Now, that could all be a psyop, maybe by Jesuits who have real archives and are fucking with us. But one way or the other, we have an actual phenomenon that matters, that goes by this name.
Yeah, because whenever people talk about the Nephilim, they say that they were like evil giants and stuff, and that they were sort of related to like dragon bloodlines, and that dragons are evil as well, like dragons are satanic. And I hear all this stuff and I'm thinking perhaps the Nephilim or these other beings were more connected to source, to the earth. And where I'm getting with this, to kind of bring it back to the topic at hand, is with Pisces, it's Pisces, as in a sphere, like pi, like a circle, seeing the spheres, being connected to the music of the spheres as well, being in more resonance with all 9 realms rather than just stuck in the self, because the picture that was up earlier, the self was disconnected from the word. So it's difficult to explain without having a picture to show. But I think that the self needs to be connected to the word, because the word is the weird, it's the fate that we cast, it's the words we speak, it's the vibration, it's the resonance that we create through drumming, through singing, like abracadabra, as I speak, I create.
Yeah,
it's very important to bring things through us. And I think that people were, whenever the flood was, whenever these beings were cast out of our minds, like dragons, and or literally cast out, killed, whatever, like we're told that the Nephilim fell from heaven, whatever, like Sophia fell as well. The point I'm making is that I don't think these giants were evil or bad, but that is the most common narrative that people speak about.
I think we're talking about people that put themselves into corrupted relationships with them, right? It's akin to my point that I've made about when you get into a more open-minded interpretation. If we're talking about the Nephilim, we're talking about like effectively like the giant, right? Like the Nephilim were not the fallen angels. The Nephilim were the children of the fallen angels who banged all the ladies, because apparently all of them were seed carrying entities that could impregnate women in the material world to bring about both an age of monsters and heroes, right? The Old Testament, the Genesis 6 stuff is there to kind of sweep mythological life into this overall. It does what it does. It says dismiss paganism, dismiss animism, dismiss the age of wonder, the potential of the human. Be naive. There's no such thing as an evil that foul. Only people who mimic it. And considering we don't see giants today, at the very least, we can get because a lot of people want to look at the myths of the past and then do the whole let's find out who the human being is who is like the great evil, so I can find my excuse to dehumanize. Right. And this is a pattern of history. Now we are trying to look at this as, as rational, as not suggesting that something has to be done yet. The fact of the matter is that it's such a personal circumstance. It's really about how someone's personally treating you. So you're not doing anything to anybody because you suspect there's a spirit in them. Because unfortunately, no matter what the spirit is, even if it's given that person some quote power, like, I don't know, physical strength, shocks you upon touch, or, whatever little personal thing that makes him a heightened threat to you, he is still making actual unconscious choices and has to assume all liability as the host psyche of the body performing the deeds. Right? So we're talking about how different kinds of predatory behavior by the spirit on the person being exploited. You get drunk, liquid courage means you're stepping aside and you're letting a demon with a lot of personality talk to the hoe you want to fuck and tell it all the lies, and you can just say, oh, I was drunk, right? Because you're letting the spirit of Al Ghul serve you as a little piece of shit.
All right, well said. I think I kind of took us a little bit off topic there. So, Indy, I apologize for that. But I think that's like something really interesting that that we just brought up there. The links between the Nephilim and Pisces and the dream world as well. It's so
I don't think
interesting
it's a
how
topic.
that all fits. What's
Sorry,
that?
brother. I was just saying I don't think it's off topic. I think it's on topic.
Yeah, well, I never know. Sometimes, like, there's not one stream of consciousness; it's everywhere. So sometimes I go, of course. If it's good with other people, that's fine. But
even over here, you're good. You're good. I was delighted to answer the question and go on that tangent.
Awesome.
You know, it's actually very interesting. I was looking at some little bits of the Book of Giants not so long ago, and it mentions that the giants, and when they speak about the giants, they're talking about the conglomerate of the giants. There were two groups. So all of our lists of the giants, we can see that there were some groups that stood with humanity and some that stood against humanity. We see that in all the systems, you know. Loki was half giant, half deity, or half, you know, God. And I think that this is something that is reflected in all of our books that relate to the giants, is that some of them helped humans. They weren't all bad. They were goodies and baddies. Some of them wanted to eat humans. That's mentioned. But it's also interesting that in the Book of Giants, they speak about how the group of giants actually exploited all of the animals on Earth, and they created monsters. And they were trying to do something. And I think they were using, I think it started, humans were first used for making a hybrid. And then some of those hybrids banded together and turned against the creators of the hybrids. And so factions were formed. And so we see this sort of idea with the giants and the gods, like whether it's the Greek, whether it's the Norse, whether it's the Rakshas, the Yakshas, and the Asuras and the Devis of India, or if you go to the Ahura and the Devas of Persia, we see the same ideas being expressed. So I think it's like quite valid. But here's another point. The idea of human mortality starts at that point, which is quite interesting. And I think it's got a lot to do with human obsession with mortality and maybe our lives being shortened. I think maybe we lived longer lives. I do find it really strange that we live such short lives.
Yeah. I think their telomere caps were put on the end of our telomeres. I think I've heard that shortens our lifespan. And also as well, it seems that our lives are getting shorter and shorter because a lot of people are alive, but they're not living. It's like, what is it to be alive? I think a lot of people it's like eat, sleep, work, repeat. It's kind of like going around the cube like that. And if you think outside the cube, you're kind of pushed back in. But our purpose here is to grow. And I think we had more time to do that. Whereas now we've got less time. So we need to be working harder. We need to be kind of going down multiple streams to kind of to find I guess gnosis, I guess the balance of knowledge and intuition, like die many times while we're alive, so that when we do die, when we do exit the womb, we can progress rather than, you know, looping back. It seems that they want us to be stuck here, like they want less beings to come in, and then the ones that are here already to be recycled, so there's less fresh insights and more kind of old patterns and trauma repeated, potentially.
Yeah, I wanted to, you know, when it comes to the idea of giants, you know, living thousands of years ago, I'll admit I'm a bit skeptical of the literal claim of it, but I do think that even if something isn't necessarily literal, I'm not saying it's real or not. Like, that's not the point of bringing this up. I think there's also a symbolic reality too. Because you think about, giants, there's not just literal, physical giants, but you also think of giants in terms of personality, in terms of popularity, in terms of influence. There's people that we meet in our lives that seem to be larger than life. They seem to have really magnanimous personality. They seem to have like insight into the nature of the world. They seem to have this personality where they're totally fearless, and we're like, in a sense, like they appear to us like they're giants because we look up to them, we admire them, maybe they're authors, celebrity, but these same giants, they also kind of gobble people up, whether it's through fame, through exploitation, through sort of different forms of manipulation, cult dynamics, and so forth. So I think it's important to, I know everybody in the occult community likes to talk about the how there used to be Nephilim, but maybe it would be more useful to figure out where the Nephilim still exist within the human psyche, what kind of people still live and sort of exist with those Nephilimic qualities within their lives. Because I think that in a lot of the ways, we talk about, there's giants that we dealt with in the past, but I think in the very same sense, I think most people can speak in their day-to-day lives, we deal with giants of our own. It might be like a boss that's really, intimidating or tough. It may be, I don't know, some kind of like a competitive opponent in some kind of sports or some kind of literary thing. It might be someone that intimidates you, somebody that's a bully, or maybe it's somebody that you really look up to. Maybe it's someone that you really admire and you follow. So I think in a lot of ways, I think exploring the symbolic aspect of giants, I think is really useful in our current culture and our day-to-day lives, and finding the people who have that giantism in their personality, who have that Nephilim, Goliath-like soul.
There was the original infrastructure for the giants is within nature, but some giants are part of the corruption from stuff that goes outside of the mythos that influences the way the mythos tries to say things, right? Because it's my contention there are two Lokis. The Loki that we understand is kind of a servant of karma, a karma police, if you will, and is the real reason why he does what he does, because that's what he is as a Jotun in function. However, there is also aspects of the Eddas that reveal that sometimes there's this Loki has a deliberate villainous intent, that which is where this idea that comes up in the Marvel movies of Loki wanting to take the throne of Asgard. That's a truth in the meta mythos. Once you start building everything together from the truth across all mythoses and the history correspondences. And so necromancy is something that's explained in the Bible that, like, I think this, like, the Raphaim kind of becomes the term for the Nephilim dead ghosts, and that people would be using necromancy not for their ancestors, but for these Jotun, and calling upon their spirits for power. This kind of becomes the emphasis. Like, I think that's some of the suggestions they're making with, like, for instance, the cult of Beelzebub, right? That's the Baal Zebub, the Lord of the Flies, was not a deity anywhere in their pantheon system, but it was in their mythos. It was a very powerful entity in their mythos, right? And so they're treating the entity like a god instead of as a spirit. Like one of you guys was talking earlier about the helpfulness, right? It's just like in the Norse, very common for the Landvitter to be friends, just like for the Irish druids and shamans, to have that relationship with the fair folk, and to keep the she from swallowing our children, so on and so forth. So that's really kind of what I think. That's one very literal interpretation of what's going on, is this invoking of the dead, of something that was beyond human that used to be here.
I just want to go back to what you said a minute ago, Cosmic, like with people kind of like celebrities and stuff kind of being giants, or like authors or whatever. It's another way to say it, I guess, would be those who possess magic. Like authors, musicians, they have that fire within which they shine outwards. So there's two ways of looking at that. Is one is a sorcerer, which takes power by which has power by taking power from another, right? So it'd be a giant who squashes other people, suppresses them so that they seem bigger. And then that would be the source error. So that would be disconnection from source, by disconnecting other people from source. This is what's going on in the world. And then the opposite side of that would be philosophy, which is philosophy, which goes back to the Nephilim and Pisces and the dream state, which is wisdom, which is where we've fallen from wisdom. And now we have sorcerers, those who have magic, but they're not full of magic. They have more than everyone else, and they make sure everyone else has a lot less. Does that make sense? So there are giants, but it's only because they're a bit bigger than us. They're not really giants.
I think that's really interesting what you point out there, because it reminds me of I played advanced D&D when in the early 90s. AD&D, and there was one particular world called Dark Sun. I think it's Dark Sun. Is that right? And they had magic operated differently there. They had defilers, so you could be a defiler that would take more energy from life force energy from your surrounding life, people, animals, plants, whatever, and they would defile the land, as opposed to those that were working within balance, balance with the cosmos, which is quite interesting.
A rough campaign setting. That was very experimental at the time.
What, the Dark Sun?
Yeah, Dark Sun campaign was very experimental at the time. I remember.
It was fun though, hey? The psionists. What a cool psychic class.
I think I played one game. I think I had time for, like, my social life was weird even among nerds, so I only, like, there was a lot of stuff I didn't get a chance to do. Yeah.
No, dude, we had D&D on Sunday with hangovers.
Who are the rulers called? The Zionists.
No, the Psionists. Psionics.
I thought you were talking about the real world just then. You were talking about a game.
Psionicist, is one that uses psychic powers. That was a you had to get like an expansion player's handbook to be a psionicist. That wasn't in the standard game. That was part of expansions.
Yeah.
I was really I never got enough of a chance to play enough Ravenloft. I tell
you what,
because they did some cool stuff that in Ravenloft 3rd edition. They actually said in Ravenloft the gravity is a little bit different, right? So everything's lighter allegedly in Ravenloft. So like your jumps go further and stuff like that. So I said, like, oh, that's kind of a weird and interesting. I wonder, like, because I didn't get a full chance to play a game in a world like that, and it was just like, well, like what's that going to be all about when I'm in a fight with a creature, when I have to solve a certain kind of physical puzzle. But yeah, that was all good stuff. Did you ever play Eberron in 3rd edition?
I didn't. No, I stopped. I think before those guys really like got big. Like we it was our Sunday thing. Like we would get trashed the whole weekend between the ages of like 12. Gosh, this is
Yeah,
embarrassing.
No,
To the ages of 12 and 17 and 18, we'd get trashed on a Friday night and Sunday night, and Sunday would be hangovers, and we would get together and we would play AD&D with our hangovers with a big bag of weed, trying to come back down to earth.
I mean, third edition, for all intents and purposes, was basically Wizards of the Coast or TSR or whatever saying, all right, we're going to make a millennial version of Dungeons and Dragons, right? So Eberron comes out, like, you're Gen X Dungeons and Dragons, like you're completely relatable, like Stranger Things season 1, right? You know, where if you're playing Eberron, there is no AD&D second edition Eberron. You have to be third edition. But it was fucking cool because they went for a straight kind of high fantasy kind of world, like kind of like Final Fantasy, right? There's a lot of crystal magic tech, right? So like there's like magical hover rails and there's crystal energy generators for these engines. There are, you can play a construct that has a soul in the game, or you could play an artificer who is kind of like a magical mechanic. Like Eberron was a cool campaign setting.
Wow, sounds bizarre. It sounds out there, man. It's like
right?
cyberpunk meets D&D. Yeah,
It's not too cyberpunk. It's more Final Fantasy like 5 or 6 than anything that gets industrial.
you know, you guys were saying something interesting earlier as well about the giants. Just want to get back to what Cosmic was saying. I think what you're saying is very true, but I think that humanity has a schism. This is what I think. I think humanity has a schism. And the schism that we have within us goes back to a particular point. You know, like someone can be traumatized in their life and they can spend their whole life suffering that trauma. What if the trauma is so big that it affects everyone and that whole lineages get wiped out? And those lineages that survive in harsh conditions as a result of that traumatic experience, traumatic things that happened. And those that survive tell their kids of the most horrendous traumatic stories that you can ever imagine. And those kids are traumatized by the stories of their history. And they tell their kids the traumatic story, and those kids are traumatized by that story. To imagine that our grandparents went through that, it's like it's traumatic. And that trauma lived through ages and ages, and here we are still working out the same psychological trauma. So what you're saying, I think, is true, Cosmic. The trauma is an internal psychological one, but I think it has a point in history where it started. And the same as if you go to a psychologist and you've got this problem, they're going to be, okay, let's look at the problem, but they're also going to want to find the point in the real world where the trauma started, right? If that makes sense. The psychoanalyst would want to take you back to the point in your life where something happened to you to create the schism that you're carrying around internally. And I think humanity is carrying an internal schism, like you say, Cosmic. The giants are in our heads and in our souls in a way, a consciousness construct. But I think that consciousness construct comes from a time of real giants. And in the same way that to psychologically heal, let's say somebody was touched. I'm just thinking about people I've known in the past. People have had stuff done to them when they were children, and they could be in their 30s and they're still suffering. But how they heal that is to actually go back to the event, physical event, and really gain understanding of that physical event and how that physical event has imprinted itself on their consciousness and why they are carrying this psychological trauma or drama around with them is because of that event. And that can sort of become a agent of healing. So I think a big part of healing has got to do with looking at where the point started of the disassociation or the disharmony. And by going back to the point of disharmony, one starts to integrate, like a triangle, integrate all the energy into that point, and one can enact a soul retrieval. And I believe that when we become more healthy and more whole, we start to remember our pasts and our ancestral pasts. I think it's a natural part of humans' consciousness. There's telepathy and like the psychic tapes. Is it the telepathy tapes basically are basically pointing this out to people? I haven't actually listened to much of it, but like it's like, oh yeah, that's really cool that somebody's done the research to prove to other people who don't know that this is real. There, that's for them, you know. Once you've experienced enough of that, you know that's just normal. Like you've seen the children and you've experienced this with people and children and stuff. It's just part of life. But most people aren't consciously aware of that. So the telepathy tapes acts as a really great namaste to Joka. I hope you're good. I hope you're well. Acts and Gaz hasn't arrived yet. I hope Gaz is okay, man. Where's Gaz? Gaz, are you in the house? Who else is in the house? Chase Moonfeather. We've got a different Moonfeather here. Namaste. Welcome back with your new Moonfeather account, a different one. But yeah, I think that there's this close association between the terror, right, and the Phi, the life. The Phi is what we carry around inside ourselves, right? That principle of life, which perpetuates. And the terror is the earth point where that Phi touches. So terror Phi, to be terrified, is therapy. Therapy, right? Therapy is got to do with connecting life to the point on earth where that thing created a dissidence. So I think like both elements of the stories are equally valid and equally part of a whole brain reintegration of who we are, to remember our ancestral heritage so that we can actually relive in our consciousness these past events that have caused humanity to become what we are today. That's my 2 cents worth.
Whole brain. I've been thinking recently that were both hemispheres of our brains like connected before, because you know how we have one half which is like masculine, the other's the feminine, and then we have the pineal gland in the middle, whatever. The story of Moses dividing the waters and getting the commandments from Mount Sinai. So I can't help thinking Mount Sinai is Sin AI. It's the light of AI, and that something's happened before in our past to divide our minds. Like, I don't know if anyone's heard about that before, but I can't help but think these stories are, it's about us. It's not about a guy dividing the water literally. It's about our brains and our mind being split so that other things can come through us, rather than if we had a whole brain, we'd be more connected to source.
Right.
Stories of giants that maybe you can interpret from them, like if there's like a figurative aspect to it. But there's this Cornish legend of folklore called Jack the Giant Killer, which Jack and the Beanstalk comes from, but it's kind of a very different story. So this giant was named Cormoran, and so Jack taunts him to emerge him from the cave, and then has the giant chase him at dawn. And he had built this this ditch at night, and he jumps over the ditch. The sun blinded the giant. He fell into the ditch, and Jack kills the giant. So that was like the original Cornish legend from which the later story was told.
I'm
and
Cornish.
Yeah, that's cool. And then we have Finn McCool's story of the Irish legend, where he built a causeway to fight the Scottish giant Bonandanir. And then he was like realizing that Bonandanir was so much larger that he didn't have a chance. He fled home and ran to his wife, and his wife Una devised a plan to disguise him as a baby. And so when Bonandanir came to fight, she showed him the enormous baby and presented him with a loaf of bread with the iron plate in the middle that he couldn't even chew. And so he was terrified to meet the giant father of the large baby, and he fled back to Scotland and tore up the causeway to block him.
We've heard that story before.
Yeah, that's a more well-known story.
Yeah, you know, there was something being said earlier. I forgot. I wanted to comment on it, talking about how like there's certain times you meet people, and it you know, there's something about them that just feels like they're way bigger than they are, way bigger than you, right? Well, all of us have been on a journey. Have we ever, if we stop and reflect on who we were versus who we are, have we ever thought to think that maybe we are seeing ourselves in the present bigger than we were in the past? I feel fucking enormous for a man who's lost so much weight, for a man who takes up less space. I feel enormous, right? Us going through those transformations, like something eventually happens where you put yourself in your it place, right? You know exactly who you are, what you are doing, why you are the authority in the room, right? And you have a reputation in that room, and everyone sees you as they have known you by your greatest like personality to ability. And this is all those qualities, and that, like, the Jotuns have that quality, and the gods also have that quality. And then you have like Thor as one of the great examples, who is half Jotun. I think Heimdall might be half. Heimdall's either half Aesir and Vanir or half Aesir and Jotun. I can't remember. But Thor is an interesting example. We also can talk about the dwarves are not like the Jotuns, because they're more associated with emotional characteristics and the power, the magic in the emotions that have their own conscious force. However, they can attain a Jotun-like power, and that's where you find the dragon. This is the origin story of Fafnir. You understand Fafnir in the Norse saga, the saga of the Volsungs with Sigurd, the dragon slayer. When you slay the dragon, you become the dragon. So the man in that room, like, getting back to those feats, right? The feats of the Ares, right? It's there are things I do that affirm my inner dragon. When I like to do my bouldering, I go to this place an hour away in downstate New York off the Hudson called Breakneck Ridge. Where do you think you got that name from? And then I spend a half an hour to an hour hauling my ass on my goat legs up the top of that motherfucker. And the first time that I did it, especially the first time I did it with ice and snow on the ground, and it was snowing, and I did it under the harder or hardest conditions of the season on purpose, was me slaying my dragon. I felt like a dragon coming down the mountain. I felt like a bigger man, and I have never gone back within that shell. And I have grown since then, too, with other personal accomplishments that have revealed who I really am.
I think,
Yeah, man, that's
Didn't have a chance to say, but the myth that you said about the someone being the giant being tricked into eating something reminded me of the myth of Kronos being tricked into eating a stone.
Yeah. Yeah.
Were you thinking that when you read it?
Out the opposite way. He didn't eat bacon.
So
that's what's interesting.
Yeah. I don't know if you clocked that, Indy, but the giant was tricked into eating a stale loaf of bread or something, which is like Rhea giving Kronos the stone.
Mm-hmm.
It's there's other versions of the story as well, where the giants are tricked into using a power that the divine beings give the giants access to a power, and that becomes their undoing. I think the Tetragrammaton, the word of power, the name, was given to the giants, or they didn't call it the Tetragrammaton. They called it the not the oath. Yeah, the Ficca oath. From the Ficca oath, there came the word of power. And that word of power was given to the giants, and they abused that, and it was their undoing. So, like, I think maybe that bread was genetic knowledge,
Or technology.
genetics specifically. But yeah, I think with genetics goes technology. Like there are legends in India about a king that found a metal head, and he brought a sage to him, and the sage explained that that was the head from that ancient being that was there during the times of the Gita, and that Krishna had met with this being, and Krishna had a discourse with this being, trying to figure out if this being good or bad, because this being was really powerful. And Krishna asked this being, what would you do in the event of a war? Which side would you take? And the being said, I would take the side that had the greatest numbers, the most power. And then Krishna asked, but what would you do when that became, then that being would switch sides. So it was an AI system that was designed to destroy both sides. That basically this being would be on your side while you're winning. The moment you start losing, it would switch sides with the other side. The moment you start winning, it would switch sides with the other side. And then the moment you're losing, it would come back on your side. So it would just be weakening both sides until there's nobody left standing to fight. That was this. So Krishna took this being apart, dismembered this being, and used and rebuilt out of this being a flying machine, a flying thing that was able to purview the great war. And there's even references of two sages watching the war remotely through the eyes of this being, some kind of an AI system. So I think like there is references of AI and computers back in like ancient times, like times of the Gita, which is pretty long ago. But what I really wanted to respond to was about the story of the giants. And just so that you guys know, you guys in America, have you heard of the Lovelock Caves?
I might have heard that name once. I got nothing on the mythology.
I don't think I've heard of that.
The Satika people. Satika.
Yeah, so the Lovelock Caves is an interesting place. The way it became well known was okay, it's been a part of the indigenous Indian lore for a long time. They've always held that to be a sacred place for the giants. So some Westerners discovered this, and they went off there to go and look and see what they could find. And they found these giant coffins, but the bones that weren't there, they'd been removed. But what they did find was sculpts of giant red hair, giant sandals, other giant things, giant books, giant things that like bigger than humans, like giant sandals, right? Lots of giant stuff. And so the story of the Lovelock Caves is that these red-haired tall giants were eating the local Indian populations, and they were having a war between two tribes. And what would happen was these giants would basically go and eat the fallen people. And both of these two tribes decided this is bang out of order. So they joined their forces together and went after the giants, and they chased the giants, and they fought a war against the giants, and the giants retreated into the cave. And they basically sealed the giants in the cave, and that's where they met their demise. So that's like the indigenous history. Now, this isn't mythology we got to understand that the indigenous Indian people, they had what they called their histories, their verbal histories. It was not mythology, it was history, and it was transmitted from the elder of the tribe to the next elders of the tribe, and it was maintained verbally in this way. So like this isn't some metaphorical philosophical idea that was written down in books by philosophers. This is a very serious matter. In these tribes, they had the lore keeper, and the lore keeper kept all of the history. So And this is not so far back, thousands of years. This is much more recent history. So, there's actually quite a lot of evidence of giants being around. And
there's a little bit of suppressed. I think that there was a tiny handful of those particular red-haired kind of giants that were discovered by the early explorers, and they drew them, I believe. I think they drew them. I think even one guy had like a few people on his landing party got captured and eaten in an event, and that was in documentation. So Western Man was they were just killing off the giants around the time Western Man was showing up, which would maybe explain a whole bunch of things, like where did the Wetiko come from, where they were fucking tearing out their hearts for the war and the rain god on a monthly moon calendar basis, right? There's all sorts of interesting things in that aspect, because it's the giants were eating people, right? Cain and Abel in certain alternative texts is understood as both of them were actually children of Yahweh, and each of Adam and Eve, and so they were both demigods or demiurges, if you will, because Yahweh is a transgender fluid entity via Semia Lilith in certain more on the Gnostic kick kind of things, right? So you've got Cain, the descendant, whose descendants would be Canaanites, the survivor of Cain, versus Abel. The slaughtering of Abel by Cain is where the word cannibal comes from, right? Everybody understands that in animism, when you eat somebody, the power of their spirit that resides in the still living or fresh flesh gets alchemically transmuted over to you. So this was the actual curse upon Cain, and part of the issue of the mythology of the Canaanites, who in the mythology reality of the story were giants. Perhaps it was history, but when they talk about all that slaughter that God has, it's on descendants of Cain. And it's implied that all of them were of Cain's moral values, where what they do is not good enough for God, and they will sacrifice their own and eat it to get what God won't give them. So he ate Abel to steal God's favor, because God gave his favor to Abel. So he killed Abel to eat Abel to steal the favor God gave him. And God didn't destroy Cain for this. He committed him to the wastelands to build his own city and somehow start a population as a mythical being. So now we're talking about Jesus hung on the cross and the Last Supper. And why do we need to devour that God? And what does it mean when the Titans were trying to devour Zeus? What is it about devoured gods, and why does a being beyond humans try to devour a god just as much as a mortal man wants to devour the god?
Yeah, I think there's a lot in that. I think as well, there's a lot to be said. Like even in India to this day, in Nagaland, they devour the guru's brain. Like it's part of. I have been with quite a number, not a lot, but a number of sadhus that have eaten the brains of their gurus. So, I can offhand think of three, but there's been more than three that I knew quite well, that I spent a lot of time with. So it's not, and this all happened in Nagaland. So it's normally the Agora. The Agor practice that. But even some of the Juna Akara have been known to go to Nagaland and get initiations from some of these Agor Babas. But so that's like idea of is an old idea. And I think that is sort of endemic, because we know that if you eat human flesh, you go crazy, right? This is our experience. People like crash in a plane, right? They got nothing to eat. They eat human. They lose their minds invariably. And here's an interesting point. Lions, when a lion eats human flesh, do you know what happens? The other lions start treating it differently. And they actually don't want to have anything to do with that. That lion gets ostracized. That lion goes crazy and becomes what they call a man-eater. And it ends up getting put down either by people or by other lions. Isn't that really interesting? So human flesh is the reason we evolved is because we're so evolved that our flesh doesn't taste good. Not even a shark will eat us. What does that say? A shark will eat just about anything. But even a shark has to be like extremely hungry to eat human flesh.
Yeah, the unconscious fear we can feel about about someone in their aura, right, is because they got that giant aura, but they don't got any of the God aura in them either, right? You've got this feeling that you're just a predator on a social leash, aren't you? Right? And so, you realize, I don't trust you alone. I barely trust you in a crowd of people, right? And if you don't know how to protect yourself, that turns into fear as opposed to you just being alert and witted.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that whole social leash thing. We're all sort of on social leashes to a certain extent, but the thing that blows my mind is that the world is designed for that to thrive, right? And those qualities, and not the positive qualities, because like there were giants that had the divine qualities, like from what we can gather. So they're not all bad. I think it's unfair to say they're all bad, but in the same way that many of them were bad for us. There's even islands in off the coast of New Zealand, some way off the coast. What is the islands called? No, on the other side, closer to South America. Forget the name of these islands, where they had giant problems too, and they actually found the archaeologists went there and they found it. The stories, their verbal histories were about this race of red-haired giants eating everybody, and how all of the tribes got together and they went off there and they finished them off. They actually went and found the island, and they found these 8-foot skeletons, right? The many of the skeletons were like 8 foot, and there was all these piles of bones of smaller people, like normal sized people. And it was clear by the archaeology that these bigger beings had been basically eating the smaller beings. So, there's a lot of places where the verbal histories can actually be validated by archaeological evidence. But I think when it comes to the healing of these 3 different elements, I think it's so important that we integrate the physical into the healing process, because we tend to be cerebral as a culture, and we've been trained to think mentally and live in our minds, and that disconnects us from the earth. And because we're disconnected from the earth, right, we don't have our feet on the earth, we're not able to appreciate the quality of the earth, which is a quality of stability that maintains harmony, which is why in the Taoist system it's at the center of the pentagram, or it is the center. The 5th element is in the center of the proverbial square, which is actually a pentagram if you're looking at it from the bottom up, right? If you want to consider it in such a way. So it's quite interesting how we need to become encased within the earth element in order to find balance. And so when we disconnect from our minds and our ideas and our thoughts and our words, and we go into the physical plane, physical world, like mindfulness. Just an example. Mindfulness normally involves being aware of walking, being aware of doing things. It's a very physical discipline. It's rooting your consciousness in the physical now. And by rooting your consciousness in this physical now, you tend to become more emotionally grounded, more emotionally stable, more mentally clear. You don't have all that, schisms running through the brain. We've been trained to entice these mental schisms. I think it's part of our systemic indoctrination and training and brainwashing, which has come to us through religious, educational, and societal restrictions that have been imposed upon us since we were children. And it's sort of why the natural healing doesn't flow. And like any healer will tell you, all you got to do to heal is just get yourself out of your own way, right? Like life wants to do what life wants to do. So we are our own demise. We are our own illness. We are our own restrictions that we impose upon ourselves that prevents us from being in a state of harmony. And Mephistopheles, namaste. You say harmony, you ask a question. What do you mean by harmony? Question mark. Harmony is different notes that create a single chord, and that single chord brings pleasure. Right? Music. Why do we listen to music? Because the harmonies in music produce pleasure within our consciousness. So the harmony of the body and being in harmony with the mind and the physical reality means that we will be in a state of equilibrium. And so harmony and equilibrium work together, because in order to produce a chord harmony musically, the sounds have got to be equilibrated. They need to be pitched at the correct pitches, and each one the right amount of loudness and of each one to come together to create a chord. And then that chord becomes a reflection of harmony. And then those chords can work succinctly with other chords to produce greater harmonies. And so we call this like the harmony of music. So I think like when we're talking about harmony, we're talking about that musical state of vibrational tones all being in a natural flow and not one thing over another. Like when your mind is overactive and your body is underactive, you're not in harmony. Those two pitching sounds are, this one's overpowering this one. So this one's got to be less, this one's got to be more, and find that balance between the two so that those two sounds become a chord, and that chord becomes its own pitch. And then that own pitch can then tune both of these sounds back to their original tones. So what, do you guys have more you want to throw on the table? I noticed we've been going for almost 4.5 hours. So before we wrap it up, I thought I'd love to give you guys a chance to throw your last bits and pieces on the table.
I wanted to mention that there's a lot of stories about the giants throughout the Americas, and they extend from Magellan and Vespucci in South and Central America and the Caribbean, all the way up to like the Lovelock Caves. But also over on the east, towards the East Coast, they have the Mississippian cultures, the Adena and Hopewell tribes, the mound builders. And so they've uncovered like a lot of giant skeletons and skulls that were giants. And they also had elongated skulls with double rows of teeth and extra digits on their hands and feet. So it was pretty amazing how they found all that stuff. It was in the 1800s. It was documented in newspapers, which you can still look up and find in like libraries. But they've really taken away like the Smithsonian Museum, which took away all of the different burials that they dug up, they just claim that they don't have. They say that they did take them away, but they don't have them. They don't know where they are. So we don't know what that means, really, what's going on with that. It's very strange, but we do know that they've been documented like quite well. And they have a different arrangement on their neck because of the elongated skull. They don't have a sagittal suture line, and they have extra volume in their head that goes up. It goes up like ours, and then it goes up again. So it's a very different type of arrangement, and it's quite curious. And they actually have found that the reptilian humanoid that they found down in Peru with 3 fingers is legit, and it wasn't cut and re-put together or anything, and it's got strange reptilian DNA, but the only thing on Earth that has anything with its DNA is humans. We have some aspect of its DNA, apparently. So that's very strange, very amazing discovery. Also in South America, they found the Boogosphere, and I know Franklin did a show with Tree Man on this, but the Boogosphere was found to have been dated to 12,000 years ago or more, and it's made from highly dense aluminum that's not even able to be made with modern technology, and it was still operating in modern times, and it was filmed floating in the air, and then it hit some electrical wires and went down. This I think Peruvian guy went and gathered it up and burned his fingers trying to bring it in. His fingers prints were gone, and he had bad headaches for a couple of days and stuff from being so close to it. They've been doing studies on it. Apparently, it responds to Vedic mantras. It's got fiber optics inside of it. It's still active.
I didn't know they figured out that it had anything inside of it. How do they know that it's got fiber optics in it? Because haven't they not been able to crack it open?
No, they've been using the technology that they use to scan for gold and oil.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, so they okay. I hadn't realized they had released any scans and whatnot. So okay, that's neat. Cool. Yeah. I've heard that it's some sort of ancient AI technology. I got a friend who's down in Mexico who took a trip down to see the Boogosphere and do a little bit of science, a little bit of meditation and stuff with it, and get some answers. My buddy, he's pretty good at like kind of like Akashic transcribing, like he gets the download and tells you what's coming through. And his woman's a pretty powerful mystic herself.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And another thing that we don't realize, and it's that what is that organization called? The Smithsonian Institute, right? Remember I mentioned that cave, right? And here's where it gets interesting. That cave, what was that cave called again? Lovelock Cave. Okay, yeah. So I mentioned this on a round table before, but just as a summary, originally when the people wanted to go and get the artifacts found in the Lovelock Cave, the Smithsonian Institute said it was lost. Then more people came asking, and another prominent historian started knocking on the door and saying, listen, that's not good enough. Then the Smithsonian Institute changed their story, and they came back and said, no, sorry, it's not lost. It's in a building that's got asbestos, and it can't be accessed for 10 years. Isn't that interesting? So there's the Smithsonian Institute's track record that's like reliable, recent. This is in the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of those bones that the Smithsonian Institute say that they never got, and we're not talking about 1 or 2 sets of bones, we're talking about like 100 sets of bones. There are historians and archaeologists that wrote articles on it, that wrote papers on it, that documented their findings with photographs and evidence, and eyewitness accounts and accounts of the people that actually found the products. And there were even receipts of some of these crates being given that the Smithsonian Institute won't recognize. And there are newspaper articles, and we're not talking about 5 or 10 or 20. We're talking about like hundreds of newspaper articles that are citing some of the most prominent archaeologists of the time on record. And these archaeologists, you can go check them out. They're legit archaeologists. So there's actually a lot of evidence. Like there's more evidence than what you can shake a stick at, that there actually were giants and that there were lots of skeletons found and that they were all taken by the same Smithsonian Institute and that nobody saw or heard from them again. And now the Smithsonian Institute goes on record saying it's all just a conspiracy theory. They don't have any bones. But 50 years ago, they were saying they'd lost the bones. So their story keeps changing in the same way that the story kept changing with the story of this cave and the coffins from the cave, the boxes and the giant shoes. And first they said they didn't have it, but upon being pressured and paperwork being shown to them that, no, you do have it, then they came back and said, oh, well, yeah, okay, we've got it, but you can't see it. And they gave a really good, legit excuse. So
they actually, so they never lost it either? Like it was discovered that they had it and were withholding it?
They lied.
Right, they lied. Well, at least we know that they have it and assumed it's secured. So there's that.
They didn't have bones from that site. From that site, they had giant artifacts, giant things, giant shoes, but and red hair. Now, the reason they're not releasing it is because that red hair can be DNA tested. You see, this is where we start to, and nowadays, with our knowledge of DNA increasing, they'll be able to tell you more about who that DNA is, right? So, question of time, the truth will come out. They can only hide it from us for so long. And all those bones that they got hold of and that they've hidden away and told us don't exist, there's a lot of actual evidence. You go looking through the old newspaper archives. It's mind-blowing. I mean, I've personally looked at like tens of different articles that I've read, and there are hundreds of these articles of this prominent archaeologist standing next to the bones and then what they say on record. Then you can go and find that archaeologist and look up what they had written about it. And they did indeed write about finding those bones. And so it's not just a fake newspaper article. The archaeologist's own notes are in sync. And you can actually build a case that this institute, the Smithsonian Institute, is basically a bunch of liars.
Yeah.
And there's enough different. So anybody who believes what the Smithsonian Institute say when they say they didn't get the bones, they're liars. Once you've been caught on a lie 5 or 6 times, how can you listen? How can anyone believe anything you say? Right?
Government institutions, it's like the institution, you put new people in charge of the institution and then no one thinks anything of it, right? That's the big problem. They have no idea that there's an unfireable infrastructure of people that run the federal government, including their aspects of institutions like the Smithsonian that serve as a part of the federal government. Like the Smithsonian is kind of like the Vatican archives at this point. It's like our version of the Vatican archives. And we're burying all that kind of information all the way down, and they're going to weaponize that, right? Because you got to remember, under a false pretense of what our interpretation of Old Testament history is and the importance to the fundamentalist of the literal interpretation of history, they start coming out with like, oh, look at that. Here's the Lance of Longinus. Here's the Ark of the Covenant. Here's the Holy Grail. And, here's the bones of Goliath, right? It's just like, see, bow down before the demiurge, right? It's this shit. Like, that's what they want to do. They want to give They want to give power to the symbols of history to their god.
Yeah, totally. And Mephistopheles, you say follow the science. I think that's a healthy thing to do. The problem is that we need to actually follow the science. And do you agree that people were following the science in 2020, 2021? Remember that mantra, follow the science? Was that fake science or not? Well, according to what all the local and most current investigations done by members of state, by the British government, by the American government, by the House, by the congressional courts, the evidence has been presented that the science was twisted. So if medical science can be abused and twisted in such a way as to mislead the people, do you think archaeological science can be twisted? I mean, just look at what happened in 2021 to 2022. It's pretty obvious that they were lying, and they kept using the mantra, follow the science, gentlemen. But actually, they were feeding you false science. So unless you're actually in the lab doing the science experiments yourself, then you're not following science.
They were asking
You're following what other people tell you. It's called dogmatism.
There's
They
a
were asking
saying.
you to follow their peer-reviewed data, right? They wanted you to follow a particular published authority, right? Who publishes the Bible in what version?
Also, in 2020, if you went onto the government website here in the UK, you could see in black and white that the jabs were an experiment until 2023. It said that, but at the same time, I call it a seance. It wasn't science; it was a seance. They were trying to invoke lower life forms and bring through people, like Divok. But yeah, it was a seance, and there was lots of magic behind it. And if you looked on the government website, black and white, it said it was in trials until 2023. But so even if the scientists came out with like, oh yeah, it's fine, or this or that, all you have to do is just do your own research. With science, it's just somebody else telling you how it is. I've never seen an atom. I'm just taking someone's word for it that they exist. That to me is irrelevant. It's science, but for me, science is irrelevant. I'll more go with science is quantified. It's collapsed matter. Someone else has collapsed an idea and given it to you in a box. Everything is a field. I'd rather go with what I feel than what someone else tells me. So even if the science does say something and you look it up and you see it for yourself in paper in black and white, oh yeah, the science is legit. What do you feel is more important? Like, what do you intuitively feel? That's more important than the science. The science is secondary.
I think when it comes to science, it's also important to recognize what its actual function is. I was listening to an interview with Bernardo Castro, the idealist philosopher guy, and he kind of had a really good point when it comes to science, is the idea that science doesn't really tell you what things are intrinsically of themselves. It just sort of describes sort of measurements, numbers. It's sort of a description of reality, but it doesn't necessarily tell you, what reality actually is. So I think that when it comes to science, I think that a lot of people they misattribute science and say, oh, science is wrong or whatever. I think when it comes to science, I think it's just sort of a methodology where it's like, if I have certain letters, I like to have a sort of a logical pattern. A goes to B, B goes to C, and C goes to D. And that's kind of like generally like, how you think of something logically. You have an experiment, you test for it, you come up with results, et cetera, et cetera. But I think really it's not that we shouldn't trust science. It's that we should be scientists ourselves and not look at other people's data, other people's information necessarily, because I think to me one of the reasons why I like science is when it comes to mysticism and magic, I don't like when it's, you know, you go from A and then go from B and then all of a sudden we skip all the way to Q. I'm like, wait, how do we get here? And I think a lot of people, they want to know the letters that lead from B to Q. And I think people look at, from the outside, looking at magic, it's like you're going from A to Z and you're not taking any of the other 24 letters that lead you up to that final letter in the alphabet. So I think that when it comes to science, I think it's important that we question science, but I think it's also important that we have to recognize that a lot of people, when it comes to manipulation, I think this is a bigger point I want to bring about, is that we always, the common understanding of how deception works is that you just lie. You just come up with lies, you make up a bullshit story, and then people buy into the lies. But what they don't understand is that a lot of lying involves manipulating the truth. It's taking things that are true and taking things that are, you know, that make sense, and then you're mixing them and blending them together with the lies so that you can't distinguish the truth from the falsehood. And science can be utilized in a similar manner where you, because I think with science is that you have a premise and then you lead that premise to the conclusion. But what a lot of false science does is you start with the conclusion and then you try to find what leads up to that. So like take materialism, for example. You know, materialism is not science. Science is a methodology used to understand reality, and materialism is a metaphysical point of view. It's literally a metaphysics. And with materialism is the conclusion, right? And then science tries to come up with evidence and things to lead to materialism because they assume materialism is already the truth. That, in my opinion, is not real science at all. It's a pseudoscience. And the thing about science is that people can use science in misleading ways. They can use it to, they can take data from one set and present it in a misleading way. So I think when it comes to science, it's that it's not that we shouldn't trust science. It's that we shouldn't trust other people using science. We should use science ourselves, find our own evidence, use our own experiments, and draw our own conclusions. Because I think that's kind of the part of the problem too, is that, you know, these scientists are kind of often this, you know, special ivory tower with their special knowledge and their special gadgets and machines. And we, the lowly peons, are supposed to kind of, you know, just follow what they say. So for me, it's like I value science, but I try to come at things through my own scientific reasoning and my own logic before I come to a conclusion. And I think that's really what's going the bigger message here. And I think the same thing happens with religion and mysticism, where you're taking someone else's idea and sort of like implementing it as your own. I think we need to take a more hands-on approach when it comes to understanding the nature of reality and the phenomenon that exists within it.
Ahoy, I agree with you totally. And I think here's a point. I think like probably more than half, maybe the majority of science today is what you were talking about. Where a big corporation funds scientific research, but they're looking for a particular answer. And they're looking for the kind of scientist that's going to give them the kind of answer that they're looking for. And so they cherry pick from the scientists based upon their previous papers, right? You've written a theoretical paper that says that. So I know that you're starting with the premise that that's what you believe. So I'm going to get you to do this research, and I'm going to tell you what the parameters of the research is. I'm going to give you the money, and you're going to do it. You're obviously going to try and prove your theory, because that's how this works. So when I'm the one with the money and I'm cherry picking who the scientist is based upon their theoretical papers, now I know what I'm going to get for my money. So I'm able to control and manipulate. And here's an interesting point. The real scientists, Google Rupert Sheldrake, right? And tell me, what do they say about him? Let's do that quickly. Just as a quick, for giggles and farts. Rupert Sheldrake, you're going to find that they're going to say that he was a this and he was a that. And what was he? What did he do?
Scientist, they call him.
He has a PhD in biology at Cambridge, and I believe in the Wikipedia article they edited that out.
Yes, exactly. This dude's a biologist. They said he's this quasi-scientist. Do you know that he was a biologist? Do you know who funded his biology? He was funded by the Royal Society Rosenhelm's Research Fellowship. That's a pretty prestigious. It's not a corporation. Like a lot of corporations actually fund science, right? So where you get your funding from says a lot. So his funding was actually funded by that particular funding group. And this guy was a full-on biologist. And in the 70s and the 80s, his work was actually revolutionary. And not all scientists agreed with him, but a lot of scientists just to stop and look at his findings because it was all done with the scientific method. And it was all peer-reviewed, right? But now you go into Google and they'll try and tell you that this guy is working with psychology and this and that. They'll mention all these other words and they won't tell you the truth. This guy is actually an old school biologist, and not just a biologist. Like he's his PhD. He spent his time working. So you'll find that the real scientists, they will try and dethrone them. And
Yeah,
Google.
and the thing
Yeah.
about like Sheldrake's case was something that's very interesting to me. It's like, if you really were just an honest and genuine skeptic, and you really just think that this guy is, a quack or a liar, why would you have to lie about his past to discredit him? You know what I mean? Isn't that kind of suspicious?
It is. Also, we have like this marine biologist, Alistair Hardy, that was knighted by the Queen as a marine biologist, but he discovered that humans have all of the features of a marine mammal, and he kept that secret till his grave because he knew he would be blacklisted and kicked out of the field. But his wife carried the torch as Elaine Morgan. She was a screenwriter, and she started writing books about his research, about all the different features that we have that are strictly marine mammal features. Things ridiculous as like this cheesy substance called vernix that premature babies are born with that helps the baby float in salt water. We have that, and seals have that, and nothing else.
Something I was going to say about the whole science grifting situation is, it's the meaning, right? A lot of scientists, they don't talk about the meaning of the data. They, they just give you this analytical interpretation that fits within the context of the standards of their indoctrinated experience, and so you're not getting much of that substance out of it, right? This is the whole bit, right? Like somebody comes out with a peer review thing, and nobody asks how the peer review process works. Nobody asks to look at the raw data. Nobody asks to say, like, what was the question that went into the forming of the hypothesis by which they contrive their tests. They're testing a hypothesis. The results will inform a working theory if they are repeatable as tests.
Yeah, I think like this is a big problem that we're dealing with these days, is a lack of integrity. Like Cosmic say, like you're pointing out there, there should be a level of consistency. And so what passes for science in the modern day and age is sadly not so very scientific anymore. I think the science from like 200 years ago was probably more honest than the science of today.
I think
Considering the fact,
sorry, go on.
I was just saying, considering the fact that most important science is funded by the military industrial complex, right? And most important science can be weaponized. So it is owned and controlled by the military industrial complex. I think that sort of says it all, don't you think?
Yeah, I was going to mention another point about science, is that the atheist science kind of has its own mythology. So in the same way that, like, you know, if you're a devout Christian, like you uphold certain values. You know, I'm faithful to God. You know, I'm faithful to church. You know, I don't sin, and I'm always, you know, forgiving. Like, you hold certain platitudes, like, but oftentimes in real life, you don't necessarily meet up to those standards. Like, maybe, you know, you're a priest, but, you know, you're going off to the bar, you know, when nobody's looking, or there's some kind of because it's like a standard. Christianity and other religions, there's a standard that you're supposed to live up to, an ideal, but oftentimes people, you know, fall short of it. You know, they lose their temper, they develop bad habits, even though they claim to follow those steps. Science has a similar aspect to it. Whereas with science, it's like the idea is that you're supposed to accept the truth, even if that truth is considered unpleasant. So you're always believing in the truth, even if it proves that everything is meaningless, whatever. And I think when you look at a lot of scientists, that even when their theories are disproven, they don't happily, you know, disregard it like science, or because the idea is that if you're a scientist and someone disproves your theory, you're supposed to be happy that someone disproves your theory, because that moves the wheel of science, right? But if you look at how people actually act as human beings don't live up to that scientific ideal. When somebody disproves their theory, they don't just gladly let them walk over. No, they defend that theory until they die. They just keep going on to it. They don't give it up, you know, easily. So I think in this, the point I'm trying to make here is that I think people look at these scientists and they think like, oh, they're these, you know, these good truth tellers. They're always going to follow the truth, and they're always going to follow, you know, what's right, and they're going to disregard what's bullshit and always follow the evidence, even if it, you know, disregards other opinions. But that's just a mythology. In the same way, you look at a priest and, oh, that priest is always good. You know, they never, you know, touch children, and they never do nefarious, terrible things, because they're just so wonderful. And people look at scientists in this kind of mythological, idealized kind of way, where you see this guy in this, you know, the spiffy lab coat and the sharp glasses, and oh man, he's so smart and brilliant. And I think we also have to realize that even though a lot of atheists and scientists won't claim there's a religion, there is certainly a kind of a mythology around that kind of materialist culture of kind of like, you know, the Star Trek utopian, you know, going into space and developing robots. And like, really, it's like basically people wanting to make science fiction, you know, a reality. But sometimes that science fiction doesn't necessarily, you know, hold up. And they kind of continue going along with their theories, even though they're irrational. But because they're under the guise that they're materialistic, they don't think they're irrational, even though they actually are. So in a way, it prevents them from understanding their own errors. So I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's many people that claim they live up to the ideals of science, but fall short and are obviously biased and have their own agendas, and they want something to be true, even if the science basically tells them that what they want to believe is wrong. In the same way that people idealize priests and don't see the sort of more human nature behind the white cloth.
I just want to quickly say, because I need to head off in a minute, I'm sure you guys are going to go as well, because you've been going for 5 hours now, is that my perception of modern science, and I'll put AI in that as well, is that it's a poison. It's not meant to make people better. Especially with Western science or medicine or artificial intelligence, AI, electricity, chuck it all in there. It's a poison. It's not meant to benefit us. If we look at Tesla with the alternating current rather than direct current, whichever way around it is, every time there's a technological advancement like electricity, overhead wires, Wi-Fi, 5G, people get sick. This technology isn't supposed to benefit us. And it's the same with pharmaceuticals. Pharma is here to harm us. It's not here to heal. It suppresses the symptoms just so we can just keep chugging by, like on this wheel, continuing this loop. And it's like we were talking about earlier with the giants as well, cosmic, like giants being writers, musicians, celebrities, having that kind of grandiose persona or whatever. That's what these technocrats are doing, like Elon Musk. People like, oh, this AI future is going to be amazing. It's going to benefit us in so many ways. We're going to have so much more time. Whereas really, this technology that they're creating is far from the technology that we could be creating if we had more time, because you've got to bear in mind that all of our time and energy, we're paid with money, but money is time and energy, and that our energy has been siphoned off so that they can create their hell, which is this frozen wasteland, by blocking out the sun, having machines do everything, no human contact. That is what hell is. That's all it is the opposite of humanity, basically. So yeah, I'll just finish with saying that modern science is a poison. No matter how you sugarcoat it into saying, oh, but we can heal people and stuff, the tiny % of people that it heals, and I'll mention Neuralink and people saying that it's good because it can help people walk who can't. There is that, but that's not why it's being built. Everything's always sugar coated. They even coat poison in sugar and give it to you and say, oh, this will make you better. But really, they're going to come back for more. They give you this drug to treat that drug, to treat this drug, to treat that drug. So rather than healing you, they can just give you loads of drugs. And what they make? Money. What is that? Your energy, and also your time, which is the most valuable thing in existence. Time is everything. Without perception of time, there's nothing. We need time to sort of perceive what's going on. And if we have that taken away from us, that's our energy being siphoned. So yeah, I just really have to, I've been sitting on this while you guys have been talking. So before I go, I need to say this quickly, because Franklin, I need to have a chat with you about this, because you mentioned an eagle or something fighting on both sides of a war. Did you mention an AI eagle? Because when you were saying that, I was thinking of Zoroastrianism and the winged bird with the one ring, and then also the Russian twin eagle, the twin eagle, where in the center is the guy on a horse slaying the dragon, and Tartaria, their flag was a dragon. So then this ties into us talking about giants. And you said, I need to talk to you about this and get some more info, that they were given a tetragrammaton or some technology or something. Let's just say it's AI. And then that potentially this was the fall of Atlantis, or the fall of Tartaria, or what caused this great flood. So I'm going to have a chat with you about that, because it ties in lots of loose threads for me. Just trying to work out what's happened in our past, why we're here. And of course, it ties into medicine as well, because even a few hundred years ago, the witches, the evil women healing people, had to get rid of them to make way for the petrochemical industry. So, yeah. I'll leave it with that. I think I've rambled long enough. So
yeah, we will definitely have to get into that. It wasn't an eagle specifically, but there's probably relation. It's I called it an AI, but I'll try and find out information on this deity that's represented in the Krishna story. Google has hidden the information from us, so it's like you got to play catch with Google. You got to move around and play catch, and to get the real information out of this AI monster that's controlling all of our information.
The giant
right
that Krishna slayed was Narakasura. Narakasura was slayed and turned into a divine palace, or a divine vehicle, also known as Vimana. So that's the mythos of that. But there's also the story of how Krishna destroyed Shalva's flying city. Shalva being an ally of Narakasura. So it's a little bit of yin and yang there. He destroyed a flying city and he created a flying city, flying palace.
Yeah, brother. Do you have any more you want to throw on the table before we call it?
No, I'm good right now.
I do have one thing to share quickly. That earlier you said people can be stuck in their minds. But one of the Hermetic principles is all is mind, and that mind is spirit. So people can be stuck in their minds, but what is mind? Is mind spirit? Because obviously that's what we want to sort of get into. And then the opposite end would be connected to the earth or grounded or connected to matter or the material plane. But then you can be too materialistic. So it's a bit of this and a bit of that. And it depends how you're coming at it, because people can be stuck in their minds, but I think people who are stuck in their minds they're more materialistic. It's more physical matter, but also a way of perceiving mind is that everything is mind. It's the spirit. So yeah, I just wanted to throw that out there, because the mind can be a good place. Like when people say you need to get out of your mind, okay, and then what? Connected to your heart, I guess. But your mind can be a very powerful tool. I think that I know this isn't what you were saying, Franklin, but a lot of people in the New Age spiritual community say, dissolve your ego, let go of your ego, but we need our ego, we need our mind, we need the foresight. And then rather than rejecting it, we just need to be in balance. And you mentioned being in balance as well. And I think we both need to have our feet on the ground and our heads in the clouds as well. Like be a mystic, like in the mist, in the mystery, but also have a tether and an anchor point. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that obviously the mind is spirit as well, or the car, the life force, that's all around us. So yeah.
When I think of mind, I think of it much more in like the sense of the literal brain, like your actual physical head in 3D space. Because here's something I've noticed, like, whenever I was kind of a materialist atheist type back in my earlier days, you really think of your consciousness as existing in your brain. And in a weird sense, by ontologically associating your consciousness as existing in your head, that's just sort of like a somatic way to reinforce the bias of materialism, because materialism basically says you are nothing but a brain. And if you believe you are nothing but a brain, you'll start to feel like you are just your brain in your head. So I think when Franklin and a lot of these other people talk about this whole, stuff with the breath, what that's actually doing is when you're taking in deep breaths is now your awareness is not just in your skull anymore. Now your awareness and your mind exists within your chest, in your body, your arms and legs, and the external environment. So to answer your question, Shinobi, I think when people say to get out of your mind, I don't think of the mind in the literal sense of consciousness itself, but rather the sort of the intellectual zerfax of the brain, that we can kind of step outside of that sphere into the larger mind spheres outside of it. So that's the way I would think of it.
Yeah, I think of the mind as I've always viewed myself as not here, not in this realm, not in this body. My mind is like, this is a projection from my mind. Like as far as I'm concerned, like my little fragment of me is here, but perhaps us, like another being, is somewhere else, and this is just projected. So our body is actually a projection of our mind, but our mind isn't our brain. Our brain's just an antenna for our mind. Our mind is beyond the stars. Our mind is way out there. This is all part of it. It's part of the projection. our brain is just an antenna. It's just electrical signals. It's not. Does that make sense to you,
Yeah.
Cosmic?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah. So our mind isn't just like brain. It's like out there. Like
Exactly. That's the whole point of getting out
Yeah.
of your head. It's like in the most literal sense.
Yeah. Also, it's like the senses, like understanding what the senses are. Because what I was also getting at is how busy the mind is. And it's when the mind's not busy that one is able to perceive. So, for example, let's say you want to project your consciousness to a different time and space, or a different space in the same time. Let's say you haven't seen your mother in years and you're living in the Himalayas and you want to check in on her, how's she doing? But you're in the jungles, there's no telephone. So how do you do that? Well, you quiet your mind and you allow the thoughts to fade, and you become aware of reality. You become so aware of reality that you notice that the reality between you and your mother is one place, and that you can like project your thoughts like tendrils, like roots through that reality and actually touch her far away and see that she's okay. So that's like using the mind. But we don't use the mind because we're always running software in our mind. So the software we're running on our mind is like, we saw this podcast, or we saw this, or we read this, or someone said this to us, or this happened. And there's all these 1,000 things running through the brain, running through the mind, that keeps the mind occupied. And it's only when we reduce the occupation, sort of like, let's say you want a tightrope walk, right? You can't be tightrope walking while you're on the phone, on the one hand, and on the other hand, like paging through a book. And while you're paging through a book, on the other hand, you've got something happening with your feet. Like, you need all of your concentration to tightrope walk, if that makes sense. You got to like quiet down all of the body. The body's going to become quiet. It's become like present, so that you can really use the body to its full potential. It's the same with the mind. I think, like Cosmic says, like we lock our minds in our brains. Literally, we imprison our minds in our brains through our thoughts. That's how powerful the mind is. We can imprison our own, but when we step out of the mind, then we're stepping into the thing that the mind's inside. Because the mind is inside something, and that's inside something, and like Russian dolls. So
rather than being out of your mind like crazy, you go into your mind. But going into your mind is actually going out and using your mind rather than being used by your mind.
Yeah.
When you're a bit crazy, like, oh, he's out of his mind, he's mad, not in a good way. Like that would be the opposite. So rather than out of your mind, you actually go into your mind, but that's outwards, if that makes sense at all. It makes sense to me.
Yeah, and I wanted to point out something Franklin was just talking about just now, about the whole idea of quieting the mind. When I channel the Fae, this is a very important aspect, because I mess up on this all the time. Because normally, when I'm on my walks or I'm just, going through life, I'm always talking to myself. I'm always sort of inner monologuing and, thinking about things. Like, I have a very strong inner monologue. And I realized that there'd be sometimes where I'll try to channel the Fae, and it just doesn't feel like, it's not clicking. Like, I don't feel their presence. It just, I'm not really getting a good signal. And then it's like when I just kind of turn off my mind and just shut up, they'll be just like, hey there. I'll hear them just like whisper to me. And it's kind of like in the same way that, like, if I'm talking right now, you can't really jump in and say something until I finish my statement. Well, I've realized that talking to spirits is exactly the same way. If you're talking to yourself in your mind, you're constantly talking, the spirit doesn't have a chance to jump into the conversation and offer a rebuttal to what you're saying. So, I think in general, we have to think when it comes to psychic and magical powers and anything like that. I think first the reason you have to quiet your mind is because it's almost like the brain tries to associate itself with everything. And so if you kind of quiet that mind down, you can actually sort of get outside of that mental labyrinth that kind of keeps you locked in a loop or a circle or whatever.
Well, it's been a beautiful show. We've just gone 5 hours and a quarter. I suppose it's pretty long. Thank you everybody in the chat. I hope you guys enjoyed. Vincent, always fun. I love what Vincent. I love what you have to say, brother. And dear Moonfeather, lovely having you around. And Tur Joker, big love, big blessings. I thought you were going earlier. That's why I was wishing you. And the Star and Howard. I think Howard must have turned. Oh, Howard's still here. Good. Bless you. Bless all of you. I hope Gaz is okay. If any of you talk to Gaz, send him my love. I hope he's good. I hope he's all right. Take it easy, everybody. Keep smiling. Keep shining. And big love and blessings to all of you. Om Namah Shivaya. And remember, the healing is a natural flow. It's a natural process. So all we got to do to allow the healing to happen is remove ourselves. My ex-wife used to get so jealous because I would get injured and I would just heal so fast and there'd be no scar. And she'd be so jealous of me. She'd be like, you don't get scars. I mean, what do you mean? And she couldn't understand. I said, well, it's because I don't care. And she was like, what do you mean? I was like, well, I don't care if I have scars or not. I don't mind. I just allow things to do what they're meant to do. And when you allow things to just do what they're meant to do, they actually do them pretty well. But when we start influencing things with our thoughts and our fears and our worries and our concern, that's when we actually inhibit the natural flow of chi. We inhibit the natural flow of life. So life wants to flow. Big love, big blessings.
Big love, everyone.
Om Shanti. Let life
Take it
flow.
easy, everybody.